For 3 decades, the F-14 Tomcat was the icon of the U.S. Navy. I mean, it was a Cold War legend, built for one thing and one thing only, taking on Soviet bombers over the ocean. But then, in 2001, this aging warrior got called up for one last fight, a war it was never ever designed for, in the mountains of a country with no coastline. So today, we're going to break down the story of the Tomcat's final, and maybe its most surprising, stand.
And this right here, this was the moment everything changed. For the pilots and the crews of the F-14 squadrons out at sea on September 11, 2001, any idea of a peacetime cruise just evaporated. One pilot said they'd never even thought about combat operations in Afghanistan. Their world was the sea, not the mountains of Central Asia. But now, they were full steam ahead for the Northern Arabian Sea and a whole new kind of war.
You have to understand the Tomcat was the absolute apex predator of naval aviation. Those famous swinging wings, right? They could sweep back for incredible speed or forward for dogfighting agility. It had a radar that could see for miles, and these monster Phoenix missiles, all designed to stop a threat long before it ever got close to the fleet. It was a purebred fighter, a guardian of the carrier. Its entire reason for being was to own the sky over the water.
And that is what makes this story just so incredible. The F-14 was already on the verge of retirement. It was kind of the old dog in a world of new tricks. So its final mission wasn't going to be some glorious Top Gun-style dogfight over the ocean. No, it was going to be a brutal, grinding campaign over the dusty, rugged mountains of Afghanistan. A fight that, on paper, it was completely wrong for.
Okay, so the first huge problem for U.S. forces when Operation Enduring Freedom kicked off was a massive lack of information. Seriously, they had very little intel on what was actually happening on the ground in Afghanistan. They needed eyes in the sky, and they needed them like yesterday. This quote just perfectly captures how strange it was in the beginning. Tomcat crews were flying 2, sometimes 3 of these recon missions a day, way up at 20,000 feet over a country with basically no air defenses. They were literally flying photographers just snapping pictures of coordinates on a map with no idea what they were even looking at. They were building the entire intelligence picture from absolute zero.
And this is how they did it, the TARPS pod. This thing, this piece of Cold War gear, turned a fighter jet into a spy plane. All of a sudden, the F-14 wasn't just a fleet defender anymore. It was the single most important intelligence-gathering tool in the entire war zone, giving commanders their first clear pictures of enemy camps, airfields, and hideouts.
So once they started finding these targets, a whole new problem popped up. How to destroy them. See, these weren't big, easy-to-hit military bases. We're talking small groups of fighters, pickup trucks, hidden cave entrances, all scattered across these enormous, complex mountain ranges. Precision was absolutely everything.
I mean, really think about that for a second. How in the world do you hit a tiny, moving target from 4 miles straight up while you yourself are screaming through the air at hundreds of miles per hour? It takes incredible skill and some serious technology. Any mistake and you miss, or, way worse, you hit the wrong thing. And this is what happens when it all works perfectly. This quote from a pilot, it shows just how unbelievably effective the Tomcat became. They were using laser-guided bombs, and a single F-14 could take out multiple enemy vehicles in one pass. They could literally change the outcome of a fight on the ground in just a matter of minutes.
So, the secret sauce, the reason the F-14 was so darn good at this, came down to its targeting pod, the Lantern pod. Its high-resolution screen gave the crew a crystal-clear, zoomed-in picture from super high altitudes, and this was a massive, massive advantage over the F-18 Hornets at the time. Their pods had a much lower resolution, which meant they often had to fly dangerously low just to be sure of what they were looking at. The Tomcat's pod made it the undisputed king of finding and identifying targets.
But it wasn't just about the technology. There was a human factor that gave the Tomcat this incredible edge. A modern combat mission is just an insane overload of information. You're flying the jet, you're monitoring a dozen systems, you're talking on the radio, you're managing weapons. It's a huge workload for one person. And see, this was the Tomcat's ace in the hole. It was a 2-seat jet, so while the pilot up front was focused on flying the plane, the guy in the back, the radar intercept officer, or RIO, was the dedicated systems and weapons guy. This teamwork was a total game changer. The RIO could manage all the sensors, find the targets, and guide the bombs, which freed up the pilot to just fly the jet and keep his head on a swivel. And this right here shows the ultimate example of that teamwork, the buddy lays.
This was brilliant. The F-14 crew would use their amazing pod to find a target and paint it with an invisible laser. Then, a Hornet flying nearby, who couldn't get a clear view, would just drop its bomb in the general direction. And the Tomcat's RIO would guide that Hornet's bomb right onto the target for a direct hit. The Tomcat literally became the eyes for the entire air wing.
All right, so you've got this amazing jet, incredible tech, and a two-man crew working in perfect sync. But there was one huge, unavoidable problem: geography. The aircraft carriers were way out in the Arabian Sea. Afghanistan is landlocked, hundreds of miles away. This was a massive logistical nightmare. Just let that number sink in for a second. 8 hours. Imagine being strapped into an ejection seat, flying a high-performance jet for 8 hours straight. It meant multiple aerial refuelings, often in pitch-black darkness, over enemy territory. I mean, the physical and mental stamina required from these crews and the strain on these old jets was just unbelievable.
And these marathon missions were flat out impossible without aerial refueling. This quote really shows you how every single drop of fuel mattered. The tanker crews were the absolute unsung heroes of the air war. A good, clean hookup with the tanker's basket was the difference between finishing the mission and having to punch out over the mountains.
And what's really wild is when you put that real-world danger right next to the cold, procedural language from the actual F-14 flight manual. You're flying over mountains in the dark, a warning light flashes, and you've got to calmly follow this checklist. You're calculating a new bingo, your absolute minimum fuel to get home, and that calculation will decide whether you make it back or not. The stakes were just incredibly high on every single flight.
So, you add all this up, and against all odds, in a war it was never built for, the F-14 didn't just show up. It was a star player. It carved out a completely new and final legacy in the last place anyone ever expected it to. From the very first strikes of the war, hitting air defenses, to hunting for Osama bin Laden in the mountains of Tora Bora, and then playing a critical role in the brutal fighting of Operation Anaconda, the Tomcat was there. It became his highly valued go-to asset because it could find, fix, and finish targets that nobody else could. And that's really the bottom line, isn't it? The F-14 Tomcat, a machine designed to fight a massive naval war with the Soviet Union, found its final calling as a recon plane and a precision bomber in the mountains of Afghanistan. It adapted, it overcame its limits, and it delivered an absolutely stunning performance right up to the very end.
Which leaves us with a really fascinating question to think about. The story of the Tomcat in Afghanistan kind of forces you to ask what truly makes a piece of military hardware legendary. Is it being perfectly designed for one specific job? Or is it that unexpected grit, that incredible ability to adapt and dominate in a future that nobody could have possibly predicted?